welcome to our podcast episodes from the GetTheNet series. My name is Abina and I'm your podcast host representing the Robin nonprofit organization. This podcast series is part of the GetTheNet European-funded Erasmus Plus project, where together with 10 more international partners aim to support the personal, social, and educational development of young people and to enable them to have a voice, influence, and position in society as they move from adolescence to adulthood and independence. If you would like to hear more about Robin as an organization, please check out robinngo.dk. This is robinngo.dk. Again, robinngo.dk. Today's episode is centered around the topic of social media and AI, where together with our guest, John Prial, discuss online safety, civil engagement, and the development of critical thinking when interacting with social media and AI. The aim of the episode is to inspire young people to understand how they can use technology beneficially when interaction can become a source of problems and stress. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome again on our next episode of our Get the Net series. On this episode, we're going to discuss about social media and AI, and with me here today, I have John. Thank you very much, John, for being here with me. And I would like to start by hearing a couple of words about you.
Sure. I recently moved to Denmark. We have a place here to live now. I moved here to be closer to my family. I've got a couple of grandchildren here. Retired, had a long IBM career. I did a couple of cool things in my day. Very lucky. I did stuff helping derive the IBM's Linux and open source strategy. I was part of a cool startup within the business called Pervasive Computing well before computing became pervasive and there was Internet of Things. So it was fun to be part of the early stuff. And then after I left IBM, I spent 15 years at an investment firm just doing investing, market research and marketing for investing in small software companies. So it's pretty cool to do. And now I'm just having fun now. So I'm pretty fortunate.
Seems like you have a lot of experience in such a varied field, and I'm thinking that the topic of today's podcast is something that is sort of related a bit in a way from the technology career that you have had.
I think yes and no. Well, there's a yes and no there. I think technology ends up repeating itself a lot. In those early days in Pervasive, and I spent a lot of time calling on Nokia as an IBMer, but in those days, there were flip phones and SMS messaging, and I was in the States at the time, and SMS had not really taken off yet in America. It had taken off in Europe for sure, and it was changing behaviors. You know, the story that we told then was, a kid would walk out of the house and the parent might say, "Where are you going?" "I don't know. I'm walking out the door and I'm texting my friends and I'll find out where they are and I'll be there." In the old days, a parent could say, "Where are you going?" They knew they were going because it was organized, but times changed, texting changed, even that little element of texting changed how people interact. And I think that's the basis of everything that you still want to talk about today.
Yeah, that's true. That's true because, even though social media is no longer a novelty and we are so bombarded with so many different channels that we can connect with every day, it definitely disturbed the reality of our everyday life, starting from, as you were saying, from even when SMSing has become a thing, it was a huge change in the world, but when social media came in, it was the next level.
Right.
And now we're also talking about AI, which even though it's been around for quite a while, it seems like since all these generative sources and the deepfakes and everything have become so powerful that now it's even a further level of disruption in our everyday life. But in today's episode, I would like to have a bit of a split in different topics, or subsets of our main topic. And the first one would be to understand a bit more about social media and about this switch between the physical world and the digital world and how it changes our reality. What is your impression on it?
I think the biggest thing that changed is scale. When you went to digital instead of physical, how you interacted with people, stores, actually probably all aspects of your life changed significantly. And businesses have been adopting, people's behaviors have been adopting. young people would meet their partners at work or at school, maybe going into a bar. Um, Maybe you're working remotely and you're out of school and now it's all online. Shopping was physical, going to stores. There's still physical stuff, but it's somebody showing up at your doorstep from PostNord with a box that you ordered online. You can do so many more things. So I think people have to think about, I have to appreciate how much their lives have changed, in many cases for the better, and maybe not in all cases for the better.
Yeah. Yeah, and besides all these kind of new facilities that you have around now, that you can shop online, order things, work remotely, which for a lot of people is seen as such a blessing because you can be everywhere in the world at any point and you can connect with someone in the matter of a millisecond. Um, Social media has brought also a lot of maybe issues, societal issues, or like fears around, because right now it's so easy for someone to either use your identity or steal data about yourself, and it's way easier to become or be unprotected online. um, what do you think about this? How could someone protect themselves better? What could be done?
I struggle with the question of, are we better off living in a world of anonymity and then you're protected and people don't really know who you are? I find Reddit so interesting because everyone is purely anonymous. And they manage to work, but I think they have moderators that help a lot. At the same time, being anonymous isn't necessarily a good thing. And pretending to be someone happens a lot with catfishing or things like that. And if people know who you are, bad things can happen. At the same time, you want people to know who you are. They want to find out who you are, meet people. And when do you drop the veil of being anonymous to being someone you want to interact with? Or do you just start out with public personas or start out with being public and then you're on the risk of getting hacked? Obviously the banks know who you are, but then somebody could hack you, and that's a problem, right?
Yeah, and it's becoming even more a problem because there is a saying that, oh, if you don't have social media, you don't exist. People are so used to being online and having their connections, and it's becoming such a status position right now to just be out there, to be recognized, to make sure that people see that you have a Facebook profile or Instagram or all these kind of things. Um, how could you do in that situation? What could you do to make sure that even though you want to be out there, you still want to be protected?
Well, I think it's sort of almost set some parameters along the way. We used to be you would pick up the phone, if you remember those, and there was a wire. You'd call somebody, they'd answer the phone, and it was very synchronous. And if they weren't there, then you left a voicemail message over time. So then email showed up, and it went asynchronous. That, okay, I will check my email once a day or twice a day. And then texting showed up. And I remember years ago, when my daughter was younger, she'd say, I texted you. Why didn't you respond to me right away? I said, oh, I didn't know I had to do it right away. So we're in this model of being always on. So the first thing you have to deal with is, do you want to be always on? Can you set parameters for you and your friends and your colleagues and how you work together? And once you set the parameters of that, is it you or is it anonymous? There's so many different facets as you think about the piece parts here. But I think part of it is we are living in an always on world, and that's a challenge people have to deal with. Do you wish to be found instantly, or is it okay to wait an hour or a day to hear from you? So you have to set your parameters with your friends and family and colleagues.
In a previous episode of the podcast, when I was discussing with a young girl about democracy and how social media could be used in terms of democracy and all this kind of interesting topics, she mentioned something which is so prevalent in our society, and all of us go through it even without realizing, which is information fatigue. Because on social media you have access to so much information, not just the people posting stuff, but also news posting their stories and people posting about all of the things happening in any corner of this world. And there is so much out there that it could be to a point of being too much, but we don't even know about it.
Sure.
I am curious, for someone who has seen all these transformations in the world in a much more longer scale than me, for example. How do you find it to now see that you have access to so much information? How how should you handle it?
Wow. Yeah, it's a fabulous question. I think about it in a couple of different ways. So I grew up and I still live in the world of I trust someone else to curate for me what books I should read or what movies I could see. So I'm not necessarily a fan. I'm probably going to get people mad at me for Rotten Tomatoes. I don't really care that 98% of the people liked this movie, hated this movie. I want somebody I trust that whose opinion I respect to tell me to watch a movie or not watch a movie. And as you mentioned, there's so much out there. So you have to curate it yourself to some degree. And what is it that you wish to see? And there's a real positive in finding your group of things you want to see. And for me, for example, it's new. There's a very famous climate activist named Bill McKibben. He's been around. He's a Vermonter. I'm a Vermonter. He created a group called Third Act, and Third Act was meant for people that basically have retired, have had their first or second acts, and now this is their third act to get involved in helping the world, helping the climate. So that's a group, and I enjoy reading what he has to say. At the same time, is it bad to be in my little bubble and miss what's out there? So as we choose what we wish to absorb, and we have to curate it ourselves, you have to make sure you're looking outside of your bubble as well. I struggle sometimes. Like, so Netflix asked me, do you like this show? Thumbs up or thumb? I will not do that because I don't really, and I know there's math and there's data analysis and there's artificial intelligence to tell me the people who like these 5 movies like this 6th movie. I get that. But I want to find, I feel like I'm an old guy. I want to find it out somewhere else. So I struggle with that. And then, there's a TikTok algorithm that's out there. So they've decided what you like. And it could be good or could be bad. But I guess the most important thing as an individual is, are you trusting that algorithm? The issue with the United States having with TikTok way back when, and there's a TikTok ban, is on again, off again, whatever. But the issue is, can a government entity control what you see? If I remember correctly, and this is years ago, Facebook did an experiment with a small group of people to see if they were able to push messages out to influence an election. And the answer was they could. So they stopped it and they stopped talking about it. And I don't know if that's true anymore or not. But there's ways for these algorithms to influence the people that are accessing the information. So I find that a little frightening, but they're entitled to do that. They're businesses. They can do what they wish to do. It's your job and our job as individual users to make sure we trust what we're getting. I think that's the most important thing. And we have to become our own curators and consistently inspect what it is we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a very important part, because leading through the topic of deepfakes and use of, or we could even call it abuse of AI at this point, because there is so much AI being generated everywhere, and this is becoming I would say myself, and not just myself, I've been looking into it a lot, and maybe you could agree as well. Because of the accuracy of all these kinds of pieces of AI that could be generated, it's becoming in some ways, hard to distinct what's fake and what's reality. And there have been so many cases right now, recently also in the political world, where AI has been used or misused in a way in which was swaying public opinions and creating a lot of fuss around what's right or wrong, what should you do, what should you not do. And I remember also in elections in different parts of Europe, for example, there was so much use of AI content that was made to mimic a politician or to create certain scenarios that for a lot of people were hard to evaluate whether there was reality or not. And I'm looking at different segments of society. Let's say, for example, the older people, or people that have not been, not just older, but are not that keen or accustomed to using technology. And some of them really take it seriously. How could that be prevented? How could you create a way in which to educate people that, of course, besides the critical thinking that, well, you should not take everything as it is, you should always inspect whether this is right or wrong. How could this education be brought in a way to spot deepfakes?
Mm. There's so much to that. And we talked about self-curating. Part of that is when you're seeing these videos, right, the very first thing anybody should be trained to do or to instinctively think about is, where did that come from and what was the source? So you have to find your trusted sources. The Guardian out of the UK, right? I would assume that they do a level of curation as well, as do major news outlets, to make sure the content that they're posting has been vetted to some degree and it's not false. At the same time, there are news sources that clearly bring a bias. So if somebody lives on the far left with, in the United States, MSNBC, or on the far right with Fox News, they've almost made a choice to get a particular bias view, which is harder. And I think we talked about earlier, make sure people are not living within their bubble and they're looking outside of their bubble to find both sides. But in all cases, they should find fair content. And I think it's difficult when things are thrown into your feed and all the moderators, from Twitter/X to Facebook, the moderators are gone. The only two places I think that there are moderators that I feel comfortable, Reddit has moderators and they try to keep things under control. Wikipedia, way back when my children were in high school, they were told by the teachers, don't ever use Wikipedia because it'll be wrong, horrible. And now it's evolved to an amazing resource, probably one of the most important resources there is, that's very well curated by volunteers and professionals that make sure the content stays fair. So it comes back to understanding what you're looking at and doing the work, and not just trusting that something is there to get you a dopamine hit and get you mad or get you to forward it and share it, and off we go to the races of down a bad rat hole.
Yeah, that's really true. A lot of people are feeling so instigated by these scenarios that it's really becoming disruptive in our internal peace, I would say. It's so often that you go on the social media just to get maybe a little bit of update on what your friends have been doing, and then you all of a sudden stumble upon a lot of fights and discussions and scandals just because of sometimes just pure misunderstandings where people keep going and pushing.
So true.
But on the topic of disruption, looking into our next subtopic, which is online safety. Cyberbullying is really a thing that's been evolved, and it's not just something that it's affecting young people or teenagers. It's something that affects everyone in society. It's so easy to become a threat, or to become a victim, not a threat, but to be targeted. And what is your stance on it? What could you do? How could you protect yourself?
Well, I don't mean to harp on the story of curation, but let's think about cyberbullying, and it all starts with a relationship, right? So let's just do person A to person B, right? So there's a relationship that's there. How does that relationship get formed? Is it anonymous? Is it catfishing? You don't know, right? So you have to begin to figure it out. Can you meet somebody in a coffee shop and see them in real life? Wouldn't that be nice? And then decide if you like this person. So what happens is, when they're either hiding behind an anonymous name or they're just being trolls and jerks, which they're allowed to be, people have to begin to become very aware of that and turn it off. And I do believe, and Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, I think he's written probably the most important book about how social media and phones have affected children, and particularly young girls struggle with this because when somebody posts their picture up on Facebook that they all see, that's always their best self, and people begin to get jealous, or they begin, why can't I look like that? And you start going down, and you haven't even got to cyberbullying yet. You're starting with just the physical online presence of seeing so much stuff makes it that much harder for people. So as relationships get formed, I think the most important thing is this a trusted relationship? If somebody starts to bully you, in real life, if a student bullies a student, I guess they're supposed to go to the teacher or the principal or their parents, not just let it happen. And I don't know, in the world of social media, you could do that, but you surely could block this person. So if somebody behaves badly, you have to, for your own self health, block somebody and not be part of that. And don't go down these paths. When you and I were talking about this podcast last week, you know, I hate the term, but it's amazing. It's pig butchering, where these people in Myanmar, because it seems to be the number one place, and are creating personal relationships with people, pretending to be in love with them, and then taking their money. And billions of euros are going out the door from people to criminals that they've been, and they call it pig butchering. They spend 6 months building a relationship, even though it's fake, and then they take their money. And this is before, as you mentioned, it's before this generative AI, which can now do it
Yeah.
in its own way. I think that's a whole nother level of things that we should be worried about.
It is. I don't know if you have seen. There is I mean, there news and media was filled with it, but there is also a Netflix movie about the Tinder swindler.
Was
And
that
this
the
is
reindeer or something like? Was that the reindeer? I don't
no, there
know
is
the name.
another. There is another
Another
series.
one.
Was I think a baby reindeer or something like that? But
Yeah,
this one, the
yeah.
Tinder swindler, was about a guy that has literally created a full on network with women that he started to pursue, and then slowly by slowly, when he felt like he gained their trust, started to ask them for money, and as a cumulus, it started to be like millions of dollars of fraud. So yeah, it's very tricky, and online safety is really becoming a hot topic because this is a very good situation or a good example to see that even though you trust that person, you get that feeling of trust, this could still happen. But it's important to get to know that, for example, if bullying starts at any point, as you mentioned as well, you can always block someone.
Right.
It's maybe even easier to get rid of someone online than in the physical world.
And it comes back to this issue of scale and the story you were telling. To some degree, it happens in real life. It's another Netflix, I think, is becoming Anna, the woman that just
Yeah.
pretended to be somebody else. That wasn't online. That was real. How she fooled these people, and yeah. So it's nothing new. Nothing is new. It's just a matter of degree of easiness, simplicity to make it happen, pervasiveness, the scale of it, which is why I'm really glad you have this as a podcast topic, because people have to take their own. They have to protect themselves. Hopefully, we're planting some seeds for people to say, "Oh, I should think about this a little differently," right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think as it's becoming an underlying idea of all the topics we're discussing today, but critical thinking is really something that should be taken much more seriously right now than ever before.
Yes.
I would like to take this opportunity and talk a bit about the GetTheNet Erasmus Plus project. The project is funded by the European Union and aligned with the EU Youth Strategy 2019 to 2027, as it promotes activities that aim to engage, connect, and empower young people. Following this intent, the activities offer a multitude of non-formal learning opportunities for young adults and engagement in open dialogue. The project is developed and implemented by international partners from Denmark, Croatia, Italy, Romania, Lithuania, Portugal, Bulgaria, Spain, Latvia, Poland, and Greece. Continuing to our episode.
This is a in a way, a topic that I've been touching upon also with the previous podcaster, and when we were discussing about democracy, for example, and how social media is used um, to have a positive impact on society. I am curious. What do you think a positive use of social media and AI could build for a better civic engagement?
It's interesting that you asked the question with social media and AI next to each other. And I
But
think I
then it
would
next into
separate them in my head
our term
first,
of
which is the
civil
social media
engagement.
piece helps your, as we talked about, helps your group be found. Like I mentioned, Third Act, or there were huge protests in America 2 weekends ago, last weekend, and there were a series of different organizations that all were promoting this protest. So it wasn't one group. It was a number of groups that all had the same end goal, and that were able to bring out 7 million people across the country into an organized protest. That was pretty cool. At the same time, if you want to take, everything has a flip side. Some people think it's fine. I'm not a big fan of when there was the January 6th insurrection and all these people stormed the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Before and after the election. They're organized on Facebook and social media. So again, the tools are there to bring people together. The scale is available. You can reach more people. So that's a positive and a negative. And it's up to every individual to decide if this works for them. And we're never going to not have January 6th protests or no Kings protests. We're always going to have protests on both sides, and that's probably a great part of democracy and social engagement. So I think that's good. Now, your second half of your question was, does AI help or hurt that? And I don't know, it's making me really think about this. I don't know that it changes things much, other than you get together as a group because of the content that you believe in and the messaging and the content. AI can help or hurt content, right? So using generative AI as a tool could make you a more effective communicator. It could also make you a worse communicator if you use the tool badly. And if you end up with hallucinations and lies, and I've seen great examples of fabulous usage of generative AI, and examples of lawyers are submitting things to courtrooms, and they've made up cases. They were hallucinating on cases. So I think it's just that's the content generator, and then the social media is the engagement generator. So maybe they go together, but in my mind they're kind of separate.
Yeah. But one thing that's very interesting, and I am coming from a background in IT, so I have been trained about I have been trained about these topics on AI and large language modeling and all those kind of things. But this is something that the big masses or the majority of the population do not know about AI, is that each AI itself is biased by being trained on a certain set of data. And even though there are a lot of people that are using ChatGPT or other compilers to give them certain sets of data, give them some summaries, give them some outputs of things. I'm not talking about here the generative side of where they're creating photos or videos. There are a lot of people that just take them without a grain of salt, without knowing that actually that set of data is trained on a very biased set of data.
Sure.
And looking on the flip side of the negative of civic engagement, or not just civic engagement, but society altogether, let's bring it up to a large scope. I don't know if you remember on the first time we have discussed about the topic of the podcast, I gave you the examples of AI being used, the test of using AI instead of a jury, and how it was putting sentences just by looking at the first when he was parsing the profile of the person, just by seeing their race, their name, and their background, was already putting a sentence, not looking at the case itself. What did it happen? What was going on? What the thing about? So yeah, what do you think about this? Because this is becoming a bit of a dangerous situation where a lot of not just governments or like government institutions, but also companies just want to use AI as much as possible
Right.
to make things more efficient. What do you think about it? Also coming from an IBM profile, where I'm thinking that making things more efficient was probably one thing that you were looking into.
Well, I think as a technology, as with all technologies, they have to be deployed correctly, and productivity matters. But getting the right results also matters. And I think, as you point out, just because you can faster, more quickly come up with a jury decision doesn't mean it's right. Just because you can more quickly come up with a marketing campaign doesn't mean it's right. It still has to be, I'm coming back to it has to be curated. You have to come back and trust the judgment that's there and use the tool. It's just another tool to use correctly. A hammer is a tool. If you don't use that correctly, you can wreak a lot of havoc in someone's household. So I'm thinking about the jury case, and your point, which is so important, is that the data coming in can be biased. And I think when we were having that conversation, I had read something about heart attack data, saying, what's the propensity of someone to have a potential heart ailment? But it turns out all the data that they had collected were white males. So it's completely useless for women or other races. It's just useless because that's not the data. And yet that was data was being used to predict. And here you are talking about the jury, and they're doing predictions based on the wrong things. Well, the whole purpose of a jury is to make a judgment based on those facts. And it's not clear that those facts are the ones that trained the LLM. So I love using a generative AI tool, and it's a ChatGPT or a Claude, and say, I wrote this, and could you make sure it's written to an 8th grade level, or could you make sure it's not so mean? And they have those weights built into their system so they could change those words. But someone says, I was walking down the street and I saw this person on the other way and I got nervous. Somebody might say that in a court of law, and therefore I behaved in a certain way. That's not in the language. That's a judgment, and you're looking the witness in the eye as a jury, saying, "Do I believe what I heard?" Where in terms of an LLM, everything is believed. It's the joke. It was how do I keep my mozzarella cheese from sliding off my pizza? And the ChatGPT, I don't know how many months ago says, use white glue, because it was a joke in Reddit. They trained their stuff on Reddit, but they didn't know that it was a joke. So that was an official answer from putting white glue on your pizza. Oh my gosh. It's self-curating, knowing what it's coming for, don't trust. But you don't want to live in a world of distrust, but you definitely want to live in a world of careful inspection and thoughtful analysis of what the technology is doing for you. When I go on Amazon, right, the first thing I do is skip all the sponsored ads to try to find what I'm looking for, because I'm just kind of mad that someone's paying to put themselves in front of me, right? You go to a supermarket and you go to those end caps, right, the ends of the aisles. They pay for those. Okay, so I don't have to let them do that to me. I have to think about what I want to buy, and I try to be very circumspect in all I do. And I think everybody can benefit from just taking an extra moment and thinking about what's affecting them.
Yes, and even if you do a very small exercise, like a test, go onto GPT, ask it to give you something, like give a prompt, and they will give you an answer. But then if you flip just the question or switch one word with a synonym, the result would be maybe not vastly different, but you would see that the nuance of the answer is it's quite different from the initial one.
That's a great example. That's just great. It is. I hadn't really thought about that. That's really cool. It's worth never take an answer from a single prompt. Do your work. Go back and forth a bunch of times. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's so I've used it a lot also while doing my my master's thesis to look into to ask it to parse over databases to give me certain academic papers on different topics. And what was very interesting for me to notice was that its way of interpreting different words and context was very different than the human mind would even look into. Like, it would give me some answers back with the even with the source. So it seemed like everything was correct. It seemed like he did his work. The search was done. Everything should be correct. Like when I was opening the link and reading myself through, I was seeing that what was given to me had nothing to do with the topic that I have asked it to do, but just because he interpreted it, it kind of sounds similar, or the context, the bigger picture of the context, it's quite that, then this should fit. And this is another example of how, even though it's in a lot of cases cutting down a lot of the hefty work and cutting down the time that it takes you, for example, to analyze a data set or look over a lot of different papers, you still have to take the extra step of making sure that, is this actually right?
Perfect. Exactly right. That's a great example. I don't want to go and say, don't trust everything, but don't trust everything.
Well, yeah, we're getting to a point where we have to be much more critical about everything that's surrounding ourselves, and I would say even more in an online environment. But I'm curious to end this talk with a question. So I know that you have not been in Denmark for a while now, but um, did you notice any difference in behaviors and how, for example, AI and social media are used, US versus not just Denmark itself but Europe? Do you see differences in patterns or in masses handling these?
Not on social media, but I try not to do that much on social media. But I will say that Europe is, well, first of all, the data protection is amazing. All the paperwork I fill out in Denmark always has 3 pages of data disclosures and privacy, which I love and respect. So I think that's part of it. I also think we're in a much, much more digital world here. MIT-ID or MIT-ID, if I can pronounce it correctly. It's amazing. I can't how to say my doctor. Meet layer. But yes, all these tools are fantastic and much more, I think, much more advanced than in the States. And I actually trust them more. So I'm excited about what I see here. I don't know about the social media stuff, all the funny things we're going through with bullying and things. I seriously doubt that will change much. Why? Because people are people, and it's, although I found the Danish people amazingly warm and wonderful and polite, we're still all people, and I don't know that when people are living in the social media world and in the real life world, it's fantastic. I don't know in the social media world if it changes or not yet.
Well, we should see. I know that there are a lot of data protection laws upcoming right now, regulations that are being taken into consideration, especially regarding AI as well. So we shall see what the future brings us.
Indeed.
It's been a lovely talk, John. Thank you very much for being here with me today and for sharing all these wonderful thoughts and ideas and experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channels and share with a friend. You will find more information about our activity on robinngo.dk. This is robinngo.dk. Again, this is robinngo.dk. I'll catch you in the next episode.